Hey everyone, and welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be exploring how to handle files in Python that includes reading, writing, and appending to text files, binary files, and JSON files. So we're going to get right into it. What you want to do is make sure that you follow all the instructions here below. And the first thing we're going to be looking at is naming our file and choosing the location of where we name our file using Visual Studio Code. So I'll be right back with Visual Studio Code. All right, so first thing we're going to do is create a folder inside of our computer. So we're just going to go to either desktop or document or wherever you would like your folder to be. And we're going to create a new folder here, and I'm just going to say CS120 portfolio. And I'm just going to have this be for the video so that I know to delete it afterwards. But for you, you're going to keep this for the rest of the semester. So now that we're in the CS121 portfolio, I'm going to just highlight up here to be able to get the path of this portfolio. And then I'm going to actually open this up into Visual Studio Code here, and I will show you in a moment. All right, so when you open Visual Studio Code, you should see a quick, your IDE should look like this. And when you open up your folder, you're going to click on Open Folder. And then you're going to actually paste the path up here and then enter. And then you'll actually be inside of the folder that you're actually wanting to select. So you'll click on the folder, press Select Folder. And this will be where you have your portfolio and everything for the rest of the semester in this folder. So what you'll do is click on this, and I'm just going to create a folder called Code With Me Video. And then inside of this folder here, and for you, you can base it off of the weeks, you can base it off of the modules, or you can even base it off of Code With Me, labs, and activities. It's completely up to you, just making sure that you have everything in an organized format inside of Visual Studio Code. So now the next thing that we're actually going to do is we're just going to add in a Python file into this folder. And we want to name it the exact same file name that was requested on the other file. So we're going to do Code With Me 05, and we're actually going to call this, one moment, it's going to be Code With Me 05 underscore file read write .py. And you'll notice when I enter in that .py to the left here, that it changes from having those left aligned flashes to now having the Python symbol there. And so that indicates to you that you have created your Python files when you click enter. Okay. So now that we have our file inside of our portfolio and our folder, now we're going to get directly into the code for this Code With Me and reading and writing and appending two different types of files. The first thing that we're actually going to do is we're going to define our main function here. So with the main function, this is kind of going to serve as like the roadmap. We're going to call all of the file operation functions within this function. That includes the writing, reading, appending, using both text files or using text files, binary files, and JSON file format. And so one of the things that we're going to be looking at or paying attention to is we're going to be thinking of a file as kind of like a storage box. You know, that means that essentially your program opens it, it unlocks it, it reads or writes the item inside, then it puts things in or takes things out, and it closes it or locks it again. So if you forget to close it, it's like leaving a box open in the rain. Data can get corrupted. So we're going to be exposed to different ways of closing your files. But first, obviously, I'm going to introduce the best way to do it. And we're going to be looking at text files first, which is more, they store plain human readable data like notes, code, or logs. Think of them like journals or letters or structured with lines or words. And then we're going to be looking at binary files, which store machine readable data like images or videos or sound. And then we're going to look at JSON files, which are structured data containers like organized spreadsheets made from computer or even data sets that we'll see, and because they get stored as key values here. So first things first, we're going to define our main function here. This is going to serve as our entry path and our entry point of the program. And obviously, because now we've gone through functions, we're now first going to just type in path in this function because we have nothing yet to write in it. But usually in the past, what we would do is just do a quick main function call to initiate the main function. This time, because we've already gone through functions, we're going to be using the if name is equivalent to main. And this is just going to make sure that main runs only when the script is executed directly, not when it's imported. And in this case, you'll see in the previous code with me where I showed you how you can actually use it to import from another Python file. So you can think of this as like it only does this when you're the one driving, not when just riding along with somebody else or being imported as a module. So in this case here, you're first going to start typing in if underscore underscore, which means two underscores there, name. And if you remember, that is just a hidden attribute behind the scenes in Python. Then we're going to have an equivalence symbol here. Then we're going to have our quotes, and then we're going to have underscore underscore main underscore underscore, and then we're going to put a colon here. Then what we're going to do, because this is needed to be tabbed over, we're just going to tab that over and make sure that our comments are in the same alignment. So now we have a little bit of our structure here. And first things first, I'm going to just go ahead and make comments because I know that I'm going to have text file section, and then we're going to have a binary file section, and we're also going to have JSON. Okay. And now what we're going to look at inside of the text file, binary files, or JSON files is first we're going to look at writing, reading, and appending. And we're also going to look at the right way to do things and the wrong way to do things. Then here for binary, we're going to look at writing and reading. And then for JSON files, again, we're also going to be looking at writing and reading. Okay, so now we kind of have our structure or our template for this code with me. And now we're going to go ahead and start from the text file. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define this function, and we're going to call it define write underscore to underscore file. And we're going to have our open close curly braces and then our colon there. And then inside of this function, what we're going to do is we're going to use with statement. Now, this with statement is going to make sure that the file is closed automatically. And it's like borrowing a library book. When you leave, it is returned automatically. And this is going to be different than when we get to that other section where I show you how to do it without using a with statement. But I do want to just show you the best way to do it at the present to make sure that the file will automatically close. That way your data doesn't get corrupted. So we're going to use the Python with statement. And we're going to say with open. So we're going to open the file. And one of the things that you want, two things that we're going to pass into the open function here. The first one is going to be the file that we want to write to. So the first time I'm going to just do example.txt because that's the file name that I want to write to. And then the second parameter here, once I enter in the quotes, you'll see different items that pop up. Now what this is it's actually the different modes of reading, writing, and appending to. So what we're going to use for the very first one to write to a text file is we're going to use W. And this writes to our text file. So the mode is writing. And then we're going to do as file. So we've created this file object that we're going to be using to access the actual file and to write to it. So now that we have our with open, we're saying open this text file. We want to write to this text file, and we're going to be using the file object to do that. So we're going to click on, or we're going to type in file, and then when I use this dot operator, you'll see the different built-in functions here that I'll be able to use to either write, read, close, read line, write lines, or even seek. And in this case, all we're going to be using is write. And so inside of this, what we're going to say is we want to write to this file. It's going to return the number of string characters that we have written inside of here. So what the first thing I'm going to say is hello, comma, this is a test file. And I'm going to do a /n here. And then on the next line, I'm going to do another file write. And then we're going to just say Python makes file handling easy, explanation point, /n. All right, so now that we have these two file writes here, one of the things that I like to kind of put while we're sitting here testing through each subcomponent that we're going to have is just a quick print statement to indicate that it was successfully run and that it's completed its test, just something that I can see myself. So here on the other end, I'm going to have a quote and another quote. And if you're trying to access emojis here, you're just going to do the Windows sign and the period symbol. And then that dialog box will come up. If you're on Mac, you may have an emoji symbol if you're on a newer one. If not, you have a button, a function button that you can click that will allow you to have emojis as well. But what I'm just going to do here is file, written successfully. Okay, so now that we have this function written, you'll notice that we don't necessarily have this example.txt file yet. We don't see it anywhere in here. We just have our code with me file read write.py. But let's go ahead and call this function. So we're going to copy the function header, and then we're going to get rid of pass because now we have something to put inside of this function. Then what we're going to do is run this file. So when we run it, it's going to call this write to file function. But because I want to make sure that I know which function I'm going to be in, I'm just going to do a quick print statement at the very head of it. And I'm just going to say in write _to_files /n, and then I will save it again, and then I will run this Python file. Okay, so we see here that inside of the terminal, what pops up is we're in the write to files, and the file was written successfully. And then you'll see to the very left here that we do have our example.txt file. So when I double click on that, you'll see everything that we wrote when we were doing that file.write is actually written directly inside of this function here. And you'll notice even with this new line that we have, we do have another new line that's added in there. So if you did this correctly, you should have 3 lines of code, 2 written, and 1 new line saved. And because we use the with open statement here, we know that it will automatically close. So we don't have to worry too much about that. And we see that it's also labeled the TXT file. So we have that together. Now, the next thing we want to do is we have the ability to actually write to the file, but let's go ahead and actually read the file. How do we go about reading the file? So what we're going to look at is reading the entire file, all of the content that is in memory as one string, and this is usually and typically best for smaller files. So what we're going to do is just define this function. We're going to define it read underscore entire underscore file, open close parentheses colon. And then inside of this function here, and I'm just going to move this over, we're going to add our with open statement because we still have to open it in order to read it. It's just like if you receive a mail and in your mailbox or in your email, you have to click on it to open it. So in this case, we need to say with open. We need to indicate that we want to open that file. And then in the first parameter, what we're going to do is we want to say what file we want to open. And because I want to open example.txt, that's what I'm going to pass in there. Now, it is very important that you name your file, the correct file name. Some of the errors I would see usually typically from students is maybe forgetting to have the M there or just misspelling example and then it not reading your file. So just make sure and double check that the name of your file is correct as the first parameter. Then the second thing we're going to do is look at the mode of it. So here we know that we want to read the file, so we're just going to type in R as the mode to read our file. And then we're going to say as file. So we're going to make sure that we have our file object. Now, in this, before, whenever we type on, if we're trying to do what we've done before, we do file dot. So we know that we want to read information. We know that we want to go ahead and read stuff. So we see different types of functions available here. And in this case, what I want to use is read. So I'm going to use read because I want to read the entire file. But one of the things that you'll want to understand is this read function is going to return to us the contents within that file. So that means we want to be able to store this content inside of a variable here that we can display out or use whenever we want. So in this case, on the left side of that file.read, I'm just going to type in a variable called content. And that is what is going to store whatever is returned from this file read. Then what I'm going to do is actually print this out. I'm just going to print out content so that we can see if the file read everything that we wanted and read the entire content of the file. So in this case, we should see these 2 lines of written text as well as a new line space as well. So the first thing I'm going to do, again, when I'm testing, I want to make sure that I have some form of successfully printed message. So I'm just going to say successfully there we go. Well, there we go. 7th time's the charm apparently. Successfully read entire file. And I'm just going to place this on a new line here. Then what I'm actually going to do inside of here is I'm just going to print out the function that I'm in. So I'm going to say in read underscore entire underscore file. And I'm going to create a new line. Okay. So now that I have this code here and I have my opening the file code, what I'm going to do is now call my function read entire file. So we're going to move back up, paste it in the main, and then we're going to run it to test to make sure that it has read the entire file correctly. All right. So now that we have this, and it says that it's successfully, we have a bunch of successful messages below here. We're going to zoom in a bit to see it. I might duplicate because I zoomed in a bit too much. Okay, so we see here that we have, whenever we start with the hello, this is the test, and then we go down, we have our file information, and then we have a new line. Keep in mind, when I wrote the successful, I did say that I wanted it to be on a new line, so it did add another new line. But these three lines were inside of our example.txt file and are now displayed out. So we know that we have successfully read our example.txt file. And again, the mechanism is to make sure that we open the file. We say the mode of the file that we want to use, like for example, read, write. And then we have our file object to access the different functions available to you. And then we use our with statement to make sure that it closes automatically. So now what we're going to do is we're going to, before we move on though, I do want to get back to this W here. Yes, it will write into this, but it will also overwrite any existing content that we have. If I were to rewrite to the same file and I wrote something completely different in a different function, it would overwrite what I already originally wrote here. So the next best option to use is to use appending to allow for us to add to the file without deleting the file content. So that's what we're going to be looking at, is appending to a file. So here in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to define this function def append to file. And then inside of this function here, what we're actually going to do, because this file should already exist, we don't want to erase the already existing information. We're going to go ahead and use our with open statement, express the file that we want to open, example.txt. And then is the mode that we use here, we're going to say A, because this is for appending to the file. And we're going to still use as file. So then the next thing we're going to use is still, we're going to use that file object to access our write function. And we're going to append to it. So I'm going to just say appending a new line, exclamation point, and then forward or backward slash n. So in this case, we're just adding to this. And again, I am just going to copy the print statement here, where we print written successfully, and I'm going to paste it right underneath my with statement. And instead of file written successfully, I'm just going to say file appended to successfully, and I will also adjust the name of appending in here so it's done correctly. And then in the function, I'm just going to print out the function that I'm in. So I'm going to say in append underscore to underscore file, open, close, parentheses, colon, backward slash n. All right. So now we have our append function. You'll notice that some of the mechanisms still get repeated. We have the with open, we have the as file, we have the file.write. The only mechanism that sort of changed in this way is the A for appending. So we're going to go ahead and call this function. And I'm just going to close out my example.txt file. You should only have one file in here as you're going through. There shouldn't be a plethora of example.txt files. If there are, you may be spelling it differently, so you need to make sure that it's the exact same name that you're doing. Then what I'm going to do is just run this file and we see that the appending to the file was successful, let's go ahead and check to see if it was appended to successfully. And here we see in this file, we do have where it says appended a new line, and then it has given us our new line here. So we know that we appended to it correctly. Now there are going to be a few more things that we're going to kind of discuss here in this section. So I'm just going to place right above appending another reading file function. And if you noticed above, this has read the entire file. And like I said before, this is really good for shorter books, shorter length text. But let's say you want to read a file that has more than 500 pages in it. Maybe you just want to read a certain line or line by line. You have to learn how to actually read a line. And so in this case, what we're going to do, and this is more so for larger files, we can read line by line to save in memory. And in this case, we're just going to define this function as read underscore file underscore by underscore line. And then inside of this function here, what we're going to do is still use our with open statement, explain the file that we want to open, example.txt, and then on top of that, express the mode that we want to use, which is just R for reading. And then we're going to say as file so that we use the file object to read each line. In this case, though, as I've mentioned in class when we went through this and also when we were going through functions, what we're actually going to do here is we're going to use our for loop. So in the past, we've used for loops to iterate through ranges of values. We've used for loops to iterate through lists. We've used for loops to iterate through dictionaries. Now we can actually use a for loop to iterate through a file. So what the header for this is going to be, for every line here inside of, and obviously we're not writing out inside of, I'm just expressing it that way, but it's for line in and file here. So you'll notice that we're using that file object. And then inside of this for loop here, this is where we're going to print out each line here. And in this case, we're going to do line dot. And because inside of bigger text, we know that there may be extra white spaces or new lines, making the output a little bit clean will be more beneficial to you. So we're going to be using that dot strip to strip out any extra white spaces within that line. So what I'm going to do is press save. And obviously, because this file is 4 lines, it's not going to be any different from the read entire file. However, this is the structure for how you'd want to go ahead and read line by line within your file if it was longer than the few that we have. So what I'm going to do is, again, use this print statement above. Print, and I'm going to modify it and not instead of saying read entire file, I'm going to say read line by line of file. And then at the very top, I'm going to go ahead and do my print statement saying in read underscore file underscore by underscore line /n. All right. So now that we have this function, we're going to copy the function header. And we are going to paste it at the very top of our code here in main. So what I'm going to do is actually place this right underneath the read entire file, just to keep everything in a structured way. So I'm going to save that and then run this file, and we shall see what's read. We have read entire file, we have read file line by line, and here we do see it has hello, this is a test, Python, make file handling easy, and keep in mind this is before the append. If I decided to now copy and get rid of that and make sure that it was after, the content of this read file line by line will include the appended file. So I'm going to go ahead and run that so you can see that as well. Notice the difference here. Okay, I'm going to run it. And now you'll notice, again, we're in read file line by line, and it now has the append a new line as well as that new space there that we've created because I placed that read file by line right after the append function. Again, for structure, I'm going to go ahead and place it right before append, but I did want to explain that to you in case you were wondering. Now, the next thing we're going to look at before we move on to binary files is actually this whole time I've been showing you a great way to actually read the file and let it automatically close. But the next thing I'm going to do is show you two different ways that you can actually just write to a file, and if you really, really want to, have to be able to close it out yourself. Okay, so I'm going to do this at the very end of this section here. So we're going to have without with statement. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is define this because we've already done it with statement, so we don't need to repeat that again. So I'm going to do without with statement. So close, colon. All right. Now inside of this, we could actually separately store our information into a variable called file, just like this. It would have file, and then we would use the open function here, pass in the same thing, example.txt, and then in the second one, we would have write to it. And so since the return value is stored into that file, what we can do is just type in file.write, and inside of here, what we're just going to do is say, hello world, exclamation point, /n, and then we're going to have another file right here, just for posterity's sake, just to make sure that the file is a little bit longer. This is a test without using with open, /n. Okay, and now with this one, because we don't have the with open, we need to make sure that we close this file, and I will show you a few reasons why here. I'm going to copy this and paste this at the bottom. And here we will run this. And then you'll notice that it wrote it in here, but sometimes it won't actually write. And in fact, when it comes to reading the file, it won't actually finish reading it. Sometimes you'll get this little glitch of writing it or reading to it, and sometimes the data will be corrupted if we have more than obviously just two statements here. It may not always write. And I've had this happen a few different recordings as well. So if you don't believe me, keep trying it out until you see it. But here, what we'll do is we'll make sure that we close it. It'll be file.close here. And this will make sure that we close the file, but this is being manually done by us because we're adding in that we want it to be closed. So I'm going to go ahead and run this again. And then you'll also see that inside of our example.txt file, because of the fact that we've called this after all of the work that we've done, the writing to the file, the reading the entire file, the appending to the file, when we use the W mode, the writing mode, without using A to append to it, it actually overwrites the content that you have. So you want to make sure that if you actually want to add to this content, you would just type in A to append to that file, and understand that if you don't, your file will get overwritten. So now we'll see here It has everything that we had before, including the content that we wrote afterwards. So the mode does matter, and so does closing the file. Okay, so this is one way of how we would go about closing that specific file. There is another way, and this one, again, is not the best way because sometimes you do forget to close out your file, but there is another way. And this way is actually using a separate functionality. And so here, I'll go ahead and show you. We're going to have file equals open. And we'll do the same thing. We start off almost exactly the same. We're going to go ahead and use A as append to make sure we don't overwrite. And then we're going to use try colon finally. Now, this statement is a statement that is used. We have try catch. We have a few different other try statements. But this one is used to make sure that at the end that you finally do close your file. And so what happens inside of this function here, and in this case, I'm just going to put comments here. This is where we would put our code to make sure that it at least tries this code. So using this try finally statement, specifically in Python, it's used to make sure that some code always runs. And in this case, the code that we add there, no matter what happens, even if some sort of error occurs. And this is specifically helpful whenever we want to clean up our file handling, for example, closing files, any sort of database that you're doing, database sessions or connections, which you probably won't get to until later on. But these are all good and functionally, or function very well. And particularly now, because we're wanting to use that .close, this is common use case for closing a file. So underneath finally here, what we're actually going to type in is file.close. And this is a better way out of these two to actually make sure that regardless of what it does, always close that file. So it's going to try this code, but make sure that it closes that file there. Okay, and so in this case here, I'm going to go ahead and start writing the code that I wanted to try out. So I'm going to do file.write. And then inside of this function here, I'm just going to say safer way to write without with. So, okay. So what I'm going to do is just comment out. Actually, we'll keep it the same. Fine. Doing the same thing. So we're going to go ahead and run this. And so now we see that that line is also placed inside of our file there because we are again using the mode append and not write. Okay, so now that we have seen different ways for us to read to a text file, write to a text file, append to a text file, even close a text file, the next step is actually utilizing or using binary files. So we want to learn how to work with binary files. And so I'm going to just pause the video real quick so I can scroll down and get the structure. All right, so in this section here, we see that we want to be able to define a binary file first. So here we're just going to click on or type in def, and then we're going to type in write underscore binary underscore file, open close parentheses, colon. And then inside of here, and I'm just going to go ahead and set up the other read function just to make sure that we have that. So I'm going to do def, and it's going to read underscore binary underscore file. And hopefully you start using these coding mechanisms like path because it's really beneficial for you as a coder. So the next step here, what we're going to be doing is writing to binary files. And binary files just store raw byte data, and that includes images, videos, or executables. So unlike text files, though, they don't use readable characters. So we have to use modes like RB and WB to handle them a bit better. So the first thing we're going to do is the same statement. We want to do that with open. So we're going to start by typing with open close parentheses. I'm just going to finish off that line and do X files. And then inside of this with open, what we're going to pass is the first parameter. Before, when we were dealing with text files, we did that .txt as the extension. Now we're going to create a file called example.bin. And this is going to indicate that this is a binary file here. So as the second parameter here, we have to enter in the mode. And for binary files, we have to enter in the mode called WB here. And that WB mode will help us write to our binary file. So we're going to do WB here. And we already have our as file on that line. So the next thing we need to do is actually just do file.write. And since in this case, because we're just writing a string to this file, we want to include in front of this the B symbol, and this B is going to stand for binary mode, which just means that the file's data is treated as raw bytes instead of text, right? So there's not going to be any encoding or decoding having to be done, like UTF-8 would be applied, and any new line conversions are not done automatically. So for example, in binary, that B hello is a byte string and a sequence of byte values that is a list of 72, 101, 108, 108, 2 L's, and the last one, 111 for O. So in that case here, we're wanting to just say hello, and what would get stored behind the scenes, and I'm just going to put it in the comments so you can see. It's just 72, 101, 108, 108, and 111 for O. And this is just going to be a sequence of byte values here. So in this case, we're indicating that we want to write to this binary file using the B symbol for binary mode. And if you don't include that symbol within your mode here, you'll get an error because you would need to then convert it, and it would be a type error, something like argument must be a string, not byte, or like Python will try to decode that byte as a text because of our mode, which can throw another error. So you want to make sure when you're writing the string to binary file that you use that B for binary mode. And I hope that makes sense. So then if it doesn't, please feel free to let me know and I'd be happy to explain it. Okay. In a different way, obviously. So then the next thing we're going to do is just do a quick print statement. It's going to say successfully written to a binary file. And at the very top, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I say the file that I'm in. So I'm going to say in write underscore binary underscore file, open close parentheses, /n, say, okay. Now what I'm going to do is just call this function here. And I hope you're trying to do these things a little bit on your own, and you're seeing some repetitive nature. That way it can kind of solidify for you. You can always pause the video and type the function yourself, because the instructions in Canvas have what should happen each line, and then see if you did it correctly within this code with me. So let me go ahead and separate this. All right, so now that we have this write to binary file here, we're going to run this file, and we see that in our terminal, it says that the binary file was successfully written to. So let's actually see if that is the case. Can't just take the computer's word for it all the time, right? Similarly with AI. So in this case here, when we click on example.bin, we do see that our hello is right here. See, the string that we wrote is located right inside of our example bin, and it gets created within our whole entire project. You'll notice that we didn't specify the location. What happens when you write to it or save to it, it'll save in the location of your program file, unless you specify the path of which you want to read that file from. Okay, so now that we've written to a binary file, the next step for us is to be able to read to a binary file. We read from a binary file, not to a binary file. And so in this case, what we're going to be doing is similar process to what we've had before. There's just going to be a little bit of a minor difference. So we've already defined the function read underscore binary underscore file. Now we're going to use our try except. And there's a reason why we're using this. And so whenever, and this is to introduce the try except to you, whenever you are reading from a file, it is always beneficial for you to use try except. And this is to make sure that it tries that block of code. If you remember previously when we used try finally, it is to try whatever code is within that try statement. But in this case, instead of using finally to make sure that it executes that file.close, we're going to use except. And so the first thing we're going to do, I like to set mine up. We're going to have that try colon, and this is the syntax of it. We're going to have except, and then we're going to have file not found error. Here I'm just going to put, this is where the code would go. And so you'll notice here with the syntax of try, you have try colon, except, and then we have file not found error. And this is from a file not found class that we are accessing and using here. And there's a colon at the end of that. The next thing we're going to have here is we're just going to print out a warning to let them know, hey, we cannot find that binary file. And this is just to indicate if the file was not found, this is a message that would show to the user. So we just say binary file not found. And then I'm just going to say skipping this. Okay. So now we have our error message that gets sent to the user. And again, you could always use those color-coded from the virtual pet if you wanted to make the error message red. You could do all of that information and just place it here as well. Nothing is specific to one activity that is given to you. You can use them throughout the semester. So inside of here, what we're going to do in this try statement is we're going to use our with open, because again, that automatically closes the file. There's a reason I'm repeating it. Example.bin is the file that I wanted to open. And then in this case, instead of us using WB to write to the binary file, we're going to use RB to read that binary file as file. Then inside of this, in the same way where we use that file.read function above, we want to read the entire file, but remember that returns information. So we need to hold that information in a container, in a variable. And so I'm just going to call that data. And then the next thing we're actually going to do is we're going to print out that data. But there's something minorly different that we're going to do here. I'm just going to do print data real quick. Something minorly different that we're going to do that's different from just reading a binary file to reading a text file here. So you'll notice with the text file, we can just print out the content. It's all good and dandy. But in this case, when we're actually working with a binary file, usually that would be using videos. It would be using byte data. And so what happens here, what we're going to do is we're going to use slicing. We're going to indicate the amount of data we want it to use. So that data becomes a byte object, this variable here, becomes a byte object that is going to or might contain a lot of data. And in this case, we know it's only going to contain a short amount of data, so we don't really have to worry that much. But it may contain a lot of data in the future. For example, an image or an audio file has a lot of data. So we use this slicing, and you'll notice this comes from a list as well, to show only the first 20 bytes of that data. For us, it's just going to show hello because that's all we added in there. But that data could be anything. It could be extra stuff. And so this slice operation that we're using here is we're saying we want everything from the start of data all the way up to about the first 20 bytes here as a preview. And this is usually useful for inspecting or debugging binary files without actually dumping a huge amount of bytes. And as you remember from early on in the semester, we got to see the different size or storage sizes by looking at megabytes and gigabytes, etc. So in this case here, these are one of the reasons why we would use this slicing operator, is just to be able to preview the byte without actually dumping the full gigabyte information of unreadable data. So in this case here, we know it's just going to print out hello, but I'm just putting this here for you so that you understand the concept of slicing, as well as that it can be used for bigger size data. Okay, so what we're going to do is first, we got to print out our successful message. And then at the very top here, we're going to go ahead and print out the function header. I'm going to say in read underscore binary underscore file here. Okay. And we're going to save it. And then I'm going to just copy the function here. And I'm going to paste this here. And just for the sake of making sure that I separate the difference between binary files, I'm just going to just have a little header here and place in here. And just for remembering's sake, I'm just going to put this here for reading, and then over here, we're just going to do a B here for the mode. Okay, and we're going to run this. And here we're going to zoom in. Hopefully it doesn't duplicate everything. Okay. So now we're looking here, we're in the right binary file function. We know that read to it. Then when we read it, look at what it prints out. It prints out that B to showcase that it is in binary mode, and also hello. We're going to move on to JSON files here. Now we're going to get into our JSON files. And in class, when we were going through this, I did mention to the students, and I'll remember to mention it to you guys as well, is that you have seen some of the mechanisms that we're about to use with the JSON file as it relates to dictionaries here. So the first thing I'm going to do is define both of the functions, type in path, and then write the code. What I want you to do is try to do what you can do, pause the video, and then press play just to see if at least some of the code that you picked up from, you got it correctly. The best way to learn how to code, not just to wait for the full code, but to kind of try what you do know while you're learning. So the first thing I'm going to do is define the function write underscore JSON underscore file, open close curly braces, or open close parentheses, colon path. And then I'm going to do the same thing for reading. We're going to define and we're going to say read JSON underscore file, open close parentheses, colon, and then path. All right. So now that we have defined our two functions, if you're really wanting to try this out, please pause the video and try it yourself. Try it with the instructions and then press play to the video. Okay. So now in this section, I'm going to be explaining to you how you go ahead and you read and write from a JSON file. And I'm also going to show you a common error that I've seen a few times in individuals' codes as it relates to importing modules, and show you how tedious it is that you only need to just do one. Okay, so when we're actually looking at JSON files, what is a JSON file? It's a JavaScript, it's called JavaScript object notation, and this is just a stored structured data in a more key valued pair. It's more ideal for like configuration files, APIs, and saving program states. You may probably have seen this structure a little bit with dictionaries, because that's the form that it's in. Or if you're looking at data in a more raw form, you may have seen it in that structure as well, where there's a root that kind of shows the rest of the rest of the items later on. So in this case here, what I'm going to do when we're writing to JSON file is we need to import JSON. Usually, the best practice is to import it at the very top once. At the very top once. But in this case, I'm just showing you in two different functions where you're just going to import it in the function solely. So in this case here, I want to store data inside of this variable, and I want to do it using a dictionary structure. So the first thing first is I have data and I assign it, and I have my open close curly braces as the dictionary. And then I'm going to have the name, colon, and the name is the key. Now what's associated to the key is going to be the value, and I'm just going to put a shortcut hand version of my name. And then afterwards, we're going to have the key H, and associated to the H, I'm just going to shortcut and put 25 here. And then lastly, we're going to have city, and then I'm going to put a colon here and then shortcut to kind of some random city, and we'll just do New York. Okay. So in this case here, we have data that we can write to our file, our JSON file here. Now let's go ahead and open it. Let's open this JSON file and write to it. So the same structure persists here. We're going to do with open. And the file that we want to open, we're going to call this data.json. And the extension here is that JSON, that's JSON there. And fortunately for us, we can actually just do W. So we can just say write. There is a plethora of different modes. There's WT, writing to tags. There's just regular write. Whichever one is associated to JSON is here going to be W. And we're going to say as file here. Then inside of this with open, we've already indicated the JSON file that we want to open. And if we don't have it, guess what? It creates it for us in the write function. And so here what we're going to do is, instead of us using our file dot to get this information, there's actually, because here we imported JSON, so there must be a reason why we have to use it. We're going to use JSON dot And we're going to use our JSON object here to be able to see and access the different functions that are available to us. So some people before us did all of the heavy lifting for us already and wrote code that helps us read and write JSON files a lot easier. So there's dump, there's load, and if you conceptually think about it, when we think about writing something, it could be definitely dumping the data into a file. So we're going to use the dump function here. And inside of this dump function, we're going to pass in 3 parameters here. The first one we're going to pass in is data. I'm going to go ahead and pass in data here. And what we're actually looking at here, when we look at JSON.dump, the key function here is that it writes our Python object to a file that is a JSON type, that's a JSON file here. And in this case, we're using, and typically dictionary lists or other JSON serializable types, which you won't get into that much in this class, but we will use dictionaries for this and lists for the specific JSON dumping. And so the purpose is just the content will get written into the file in a more JSON way. And then you'll notice as well, before I continue on here, let me just show this, where we have JSON.dumps versus dump. So that .dumps there, it allows for it to return JSON text, sending things like, for example, it's used for sending things over the network. But the dump is just, it writes to a file, whereas dumps is writing to a string. And dump, which is what we're about to use, doesn't return anything, but dumps does. So we're going to be using dump because we just want to write to a file. We don't want to write to a string. And on top of that, we don't necessarily need to return anything. We don't want to. So we're just going to use dump. All right. So just didn't want to miss that out. So the next thing we're actually going to be looking at as the second parameter here is we're going to actually pass in the file. And so what we're saying here is the file object is going to be used for opening to write here. And so we want to, pretty much what's stored in there is going to be this data.json and the mode in which we're going to be using. And that's just going to tell JSON.dump where to write that JSON file to. So we're just going to pass in file as the second parameter. The third parameter that we're actually going to be using here is going to be indent, and we're going to set that to be 2. Now, this purpose is just to how we have written it. I could write this on one line, but it's just to show that it can be indented 2 spaces. It becomes a little bit more readable, so it'll be like structured. For example, let me go ahead and just show you that. I do just like to have all of my stuff on one line, but I'll just show you what actually happened. All right, so when it writes there, it will write in the structure in which I structured it already previously before I made it on one line. So it's just optional formatting. You don't necessarily have to do that. And the question that I asked individuals in class is, what kind of variable is this? And this was just review from when we went over different types of variable parameters, arguments, and functions concepts last week. Pause the video, think about it, and then press it. But this is actually considered a default parameter, default value here, and because it's assigning to indent 2. So it's an optional way of formatting. So now that we've kind of broken down the parameters of passing into the dump function here, the next thing I want to do is just print out a successful completion method, or there we go, message here to just indicate that the JSON file was written successfully. And then at the very top of this function here, I'm going to also print out that I am in write underscore JSON underscore file, open, close, curly, or parentheses, colon, backward slash, n. All right. So now that we have the structure here, what I really want you to pay attention to is this subsection right here. We have our dictionary with key value pairs. We're opening our JSON file using that JSON extension. We're using and keeping that write mode there. And we're making sure that we import JSON to be able to access a more easily, readily function called dump. What that function is going to do is it's going to write to that file that we passed in. So it's taking the data, it's going to write to the file that we passed in, and it's going to indent it two spaces indented in. So let's go ahead and call this function and then run it. And I'm just going to copy line 8 so that I can get that header and modify it a little bit down here from JSON. And next up is, let's make sure this does the right thing. We're going to do JSON file. All right, so now I'm going to save this and run this. Okay, so it seems like it's been successfully written. Let's check and test it out. So we see here, yes, our JSON file was written, and we see the open, close curly braces. We see the extension here, so let's double click on this. And now you see here, yes, it was formatted with that 2 indented space for each line. I hope you understand, you see that. 2 spaces there, 2 spaces there, 2 spaces there. And it's structured and organized in a beautiful way. We have our key and our value paired associated. Now, this reading and writing, in the past, a lot of students have used this whenever they had to work on their project where you could pick what you wanted to do. For this specific project, you could pick an adventure game, you could pick a scoring, like maybe playing a game with some students, a grid game, and you save the score of the user, or even, for example, for the adventure game storing, for example, here it would be inventory and then a list of all the items that they picked up. And so in this case here, we have a good set of information of how to read and write to a file, and you could use each of them individually throughout the semester for any type of the project that you want to use, and I would highly recommend that you do so that at least you get that practice in. All right, so now that we've finished writing to a JSON file, now we're going to go ahead and read to one. Now, in this case, again, we're going to have to import JSON, and the reason that is because we didn't just do a one import at the very top of our file, which is the best way to do it. Instead, I imported it into write JSON file and imported it into read JSON file. Please make sure you only do one import at the top of your file and don't just completely import each function each time in each function that you're using, because it can be redundant since you're already using this in another function. All right, so I just wanted to show you the most common mistakes I saw and just how to correct it. Don't use them within each function. It still works, but condense your code. One import at the very top is beneficial. So I'm going to go ahead copy this, place this at the top, save, and I'm going to comment this out here, and I'm going to comment this out here. Again, you can keep them the same, it's completely up to you, but one import is enough. Now for reading, again, in the same way we read the text file, and the same way that we read the binary file, we are going to be using the try except, because we want it to try to read it. But if it can't find it, we want it to print out some error message to the user. So here we're just going to set it up, try, except, file not found error, colon. And I'm just going to put a comment here, code here. And on this line here, because I've already have a print statement prior, I'm just going to copy my line 78 and modify it, not for it to say binary files, but for it to say JSON files inside of this read JSON file function. So we're going to just say, instead of binary, erase that, JSON file not found skipping. All right. So now that we've set up our try except statement, now it's time for us to add in some cool code here. So the first thing we're going to do is do with open, and then we're going to pass in data.json as the first parameter. As the second parameter here, we're just going to pass in R, indicates that we want to read this file, and then we're going to do as file here. Then inside of this function, again, we're going to hold that value in a variable here, in this object here. So in this case, we're going to have data that's going to hold that. But on the other end, we're going to use the JSON object here, and we're going to say JSON dot, and instead of us using dump, what we're going to do is use load. Now this load function is going to allow us to pass in our file object so that it can actually read the data.json, know in the mode, read that in, load it, and it's going to return this into our data object here. And then it's going to go ahead and print it out. So we're going to print out data. So that's it, guys. That's it for this JSON file. So now all we have to do is do our quick little print statement, indicating that it has been successfully read. And then we're going to make sure that we print at the top the function that we're in. Now what we're going to do is call this read JSON file function at the very top here, save it, and we're going to run it. And it looks like it was read successfully, but let's see in the terminal if it was. So here we see that it did read that JSON file and it displayed it out in the same way that I added it in. So the name with the value, the age with the value, and the city with the value. So pretty much this is three different ways, three different texts or files that you can read in and write to and append to. So we've read through text files. We've read through binary files. We've read through JSON files. We looked at how to correctly import modules and use them. We've looked at some of the better ways for you to actually read and write to a file by using the with open statement. We've also looked at different ways to actually read a file without using the with statement and figuring out the best way. We've looked at the different modes and the benefit of using append if we're writing multiple times to a different function versus using W to just overwrite over a file. We learned about the binary files, how we actually read that and how we write to it. We've learned about JSON files, how we read to it, how we write to it, how we've used a module to be able to access the different functions associated to that. And now we've also looked at the main function here. So we've looked into all of these concepts, and I hope that this all makes a little bit more sense to you, and I hope that you do eventually use some of these concepts within your projects or any of the programs. Even if it doesn't ask you to, I would really hope that you try your hand at using some of these different functionalities just to get a better understanding of it. And again, the different ways, the different type of files that we use: text file, which just stores human readable data like notes, codes, or logs. We looked at binary files, which just store machine readable data like images and videos and sound. JSON files that are structured data containers that are like more like spreadsheets made from computers, so they store data and different items as such. And also storing API responses and passing data between apps. And JSON is a very universal language. It's readable by, JSON is a very universal notation. It's very readable by many languages, not just in Python. And in fact, if you do take CS 121 next semester, you will see JSON again. So I would highly recommend that you try out using JSON files as much as possible and getting familiar with the structure and running into any issues that you may possibly run into now before you get into the next course. Anyways, I hope that this video helped you understand reading and writing and appending to different types of files. And if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Take care and have a great day.